All right, welcome everybody. Little Victories, Kathy Brophy here, and I am sitting with Ellie Robinson. And I met Ellie, I think it was in the fall, at an adoption event that she and I were both speaking to support an agency called Road to Adoption. Ellie is the COO and co-founder of an organization called Adoptee Identity. And she and I and some other folks got into a really nice conversation at the end of this event we did in the fall. And we've been chatting, and I thought it would be great for her to come on and share her wealth of knowledge around adoption and all that that means. I'm going to read the first paragraph that is on their website, and we are going to give you all the information of this organization, which is a tremendous resource. But here's their About Us. Adopted people are everywhere, in our classrooms, healthcare systems, workplaces, and families. Yet their full identity experiences often remain unseen. The dominant adoption narrative rarely reflects the emotional complexity, ambiguity, and lifelong identity development many adoptees and their families navigate. So welcome, Ellie Robinson.
Thank you. It's so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And folks, she's in the middle of some really busy stuff, and she took a break to come on and be here, and I'm excited for this episode to be released. All right, so Ellie, we're going to get into some personal, sharing of your story. My story's probably going to come up, and I want this to be a space where we are able to offer information for people that they may not know or didn't realize was important to know. So, you are an adoptee. Maybe do you want to start a little bit about your story, and then we can kind of go from there?
Sure, yeah. So, I was born and adopted in Rhode Island. I was, they use the term relinquished at birth. I have mixed feelings about that term sometimes, but relinquished right at birth. So I was in foster care for about 10 days before I went home with my mom and dad. Different states have each state has different requirements of how long between when a baby is born and when adoption can actually happen. So I went home with my parents when I was 10 days old, but my adoption wasn't finalized until about, I think, 6 or 7 months later. There also is a 2-week wait period at the time when I was born. This might have changed now. But when I was born, there was a 2-week waiting period when a birth mother could change her mind once the baby was born, if she didn't want to put the baby up for adoption anymore, she could change her mind. But the agency felt really strongly that that wasn't going to happen and let my parents take me home when I was 10 days instead of 14 days. So I'm sharing those little bits of details because I think there's just so much to the process that people really don't know. And I think it's really interesting when we think about the intricacies of each adoption story, and everyone's story is so different. But I think something that might happen as we're talking today is that we'll see there's a lot of alignment and themes and sort of commonalities that we all experience in different ways, but some really deep through lines in the adoption and biological unknown world, I would say. So yeah, I get asked all the time when I found out I was adopted, and I don't ever have an answer because I don't remember finding out. My parents told us, my sister is also adopted, and they told us when we were too young to even know what that meant. But that was something they had to do a little bit of training for my sister's adoption in order to adopt her. They didn't have to do any training when they adopted me, and I don't know if that's because they had fulfilled the requirement or if it just wasn't required in Rhode Island. She was adopted in Tennessee, so different states, different laws, rules. And the one thing that they did learn in that training was, they learned more than one thing, but the major thing they learned was that they should tell us immediately, as soon as we could even begin to understand what it means that we were adopted, that we should know. So I have a children's book that's called The Day We Met You that my parents read to me and my sister, and I still have it. And I imagine that is one of the ways that I started to understand that I was adopted. I don't remember reading that book, but I'm sure we did. So I've known my whole life. There's also some like serious physical differences between myself and my family. So I think I would have had questions even if they hadn't told me. And there's sort of like an intrinsic feeling I think that a lot of adoptees could relate to around sort of the difference in what it is like to be around someone you're biologically related to versus someone you're not biologically related to. So I think that I spent much of the first 2 decades of my life feeling super grateful for being adopted. It was impossible and kind of still is impossible for me to picture any two other people being my parents. And I had questions. I had so many questions. And I when I was little, and I think I might have shared this story with you at the event we spoke at in the fall, but when I was little, I used to make up stories, and I think a lot of it was like delaying going to bed. But I would like run back and forth from my room to my parents' room and be like, oh, I forgot to tell you that when I was in my birth mom's belly, we went on vacation to California. And we had so much fun, and we did all these things. And I was probably like 5 years old, maybe, telling this story. I definitely did not go to California in my birth mom's belly. I don't know where I got that. But in my mind, I think I was trying to grapple with the fact that I knew there was like this other person who I was connected to somehow. And in my mind, it was beautiful and lovely and fun and like vacations in California. But obviously it was all like a fantasy, and I didn't have any concrete anything. And at age 5, that's okay, right? And I will share this story because I think it's an interesting sort of dynamic to understand that my sister, who was also adopted right at birth, she's 3 years older than I am. She similarly had, I guess fantasy doesn't feel like the right word, because in my mind fantasy is more like fun and like this special thing that doesn't exist that could exist type of thing. But my sister had a different internalization of what it meant to be adopted. And we were raised Jewish, and we were at temple one day, and there's a prayer at temple that you say when you're in mourning, either right after someone has passed away or on the anniversary of their death. And when you say that prayer, if you're an adult, you stand up. Kids don't stand. My sister was like 8 years old, and they were about to say the prayer, and my sister stood up. Mm-hmm. And my mom was very confused because kids don't typically stand, and she didn't know why she was standing. So she sat her down and she asked her what she was standing for, and she said she was standing for her birth mom. Oh. And her answer, like when my mom asked why, she said because, well, she has to be dead, right? Because otherwise I'd be with her. And so I was like off in California having vacations in my mind, and my sister, I think, was feeling more of the abandonment, and like obviously the only rationale for me not being with her is that she's dead. And she was not dead. That was not what happened. So I actually don't know how my mom exactly responded to that. I don't know if she even remembers. I think she was really shocked in that moment, and like didn't have a toolkit for how to respond to something like that. But it was, an interesting way of understanding how two people raised in the same home, same parents, obviously we have different biology, but told all the same messages, had really different understandings of our experiences. So that's like what I remember from my childhood. I don't remember adoption being a big part of what I thought about. But then I went home for Thanksgiving. So this was after we met, because we were earlier in November we met, I believe. Okay. I went home went to my parents' house in Florida for Thanksgiving. And my mom found, and I think she wanted to show my husband this, she thought it was funny, but she found like a journal that I did when I was in maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And it was all about me. It was like a journal about me, or a book about me. And on the first page, I wrote like my name, my address, my parents' age, because they adopted me in their mid-40s, and I could not get over how much older they were than all of my friends' parents. So I announced that every chance I got. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, and I'm adopted, and that's my favorite thing about me. And I wrote a whole paragraph about how being adopted was my favorite thing about myself.
Wow.
And it kind of surprised me because I don't have like such memory of it being so prominent in my childhood, but in hindsight it probably was, and I just didn't realize, or it's not standing out maybe because it was in my mind again such a positive thing. Fast forward, I I was about to graduate from undergrad and I was getting ready to apply to grad schools. And I always knew that I would want to find my biological family. I didn't know how or when or what approach I would take for doing that. Um, but I was applying to grad schools thinking maybe I would finally leave Rhode Island. And then thinking if I did leave Rhode Island, I'd probably stay out of Rhode Island and not come back. And also know that everybody from Rhode Island stays in Rhode Island. And I knew I
Read
was
that.
born here. It's a thing, it's very much a thing. I knew I was born here in the little bit of information I got when I was adopted. So I had a closed adoption, which means everything was private, no names, information, anything identifying was shared. But you get a packet of, they call it non-identifying information, and mine was very much non-identifying and provided very little information. But the little bit I knew was that my birth mom was living with her parents when I was born and had two siblings who were also still in Rhode Island. So I figured they were true Rhode Islanders. So I was like, you know what? I should just do it. I should just find her now, because if I'm not, it'll be much easier to do it while I'm in Rhode Island. That was about all I thought about. And like, what does she look like? I'd love to know what she looks like. And what is her medical history? Because every adoptee thinks about these things.
Yeah.
So the very sort of long, but not that long story short, is that I went to the adoption agency that I was adopted through in Providence. I told them that I wanted to meet my birth mother. They sort of like vetted me, I think, and then sent her a letter saying that I was looking for her, basically. And within a month, we were together at the adoption agency meeting. So she was totally open to meeting me and had been kind of like waiting for that outreach in a lot of ways, but wanted it to be a decision that I made, not a decision that she made. She felt like she made her decision and then it would be up to me if I ever did want to find her. At the time, they couldn't find my birth father. And once I met her and my siblings and her family and my grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody, I was like, this is more than enough right now. It turns out when you meet your biological family, you learn a lot more than just what they look like in your medical history. And there's relationships and people, and you're a human being, and so you'll have feelings and all of the things that in hindsight, I don't know if I think I still would have done it, but I might have been more protective of myself in doing it, because it opened up a roller coaster that I was not ready for. And again, I don't know that you'll ever be really ready for that, but I think there was a lot I just was not ready for. And the shortest way that I could describe that is, for the first time, there were negative things associated with my adoption story that I had never heard and never could have possibly even conceived of. So it was a really like, stop me in my tracks. Whoa, this is not, we definitely didn't go to California when I was in her belly. This was not this beautiful, magical thing. And there was a lot of loss and trauma associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the beginning of my journey of understanding the loss and trauma that I experienced as the baby being put up for adoption. But it wasn't until, so that was in 2015. It wasn't until 2019 I met my biological father, and this was also a roller coaster. So it wasn't until this experience that I think there's a term that some adoptees use, and it doesn't resonate with everybody, but some adoptees use a term called coming out of the fog. And the way that I understand the fog is like when you are in the everything is beautiful, positive, adoption is love, period, mindset, that is being in the fog. Once and if you start to see that there's a lot of love and beautiful things that are associated with adoption, but there's also trauma and loss and things that feel contradictory to beauty and love. That's when you've come out of the fog. And that looks different for everybody, but I think that my fog began to lift in 2019 when I discovered that my birth mother was wrong about who my birth father was. So the wrong person signed over parental rights. And in 2019, I learned that he had passed away 10 years prior. And I had I thought I had a half sister shared by my birth father. And it wasn't until I met her and we did DNA testing and a long, rough journey of reunion and then sort of like unreunion in a way, where we learned that we were not biologically related and he was not my biological father. And then with support from my biological aunt, we figured out who my biological father actually was. So that's like the tippy tip of the iceberg of that journey. But I will tell you, it started in like March of 2019, and it wasn't until late August of 2019 that I actually met my actual birth father. And that was news to him. Like, he did not know he had a 25-year-old daughter out there in the world. And fortunately, he welcomed me with open arms, and it was a different type of reunion. It was more of like a DNA reunion than an adoption reunion in a lot of ways, because no one knew I existed. But it was a really interesting journey, I would say. And through that, there was a moment when I officially confirmed that I was not biologically related to my half-sister, which meant she was not my half-sister, and the man who had passed away, who I thought was my biological father, was actually not my biological father, where I, like, actually, the only way I could tell this story is that the grief that I was feeling knocked me onto the floor, and I found myself lying on my bedroom floor, and I was crying, and the first thing I did was call my mom and dad, and then they felt bad, so I felt more bad, and I didn't want them to feel bad, but there was really nothing they could do for me in that moment. Yeah. And so I got off the phone with them and I Googled exactly this. I will never forget it, because I knew, I was like, I hope Google is smart enough to know what I mean. But I wrote into Google and I said, do other adoptees feel this way? That's all I said. I didn't know how to describe what I was feeling. I didn't know what it was. I think I understood grief. I had lost people prior to that, so I understood grief, but it was grief unlike any grief I had felt before.
Yes.
And such a foreign experience that I was having. And like, I think the best way to describe everything that went down in that year was like a full identity crisis in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I just was like, I was at such a loss with what to do, who to talk to, what to say, how to say it. I didn't know what resources were out there. I learned all these terms like coming out of the fog and my non-identifying information. I learned all of these things after I Googled, do other adoptees feel this way? Right. I did not have this language, this toolkit, and there's still a lot I'm learning. But I will close all of that sort of long-winded story, and it's hard to tell that super succinctly, but yeah. I will close that story to say that in that process, after my silly Google and trying to find resources, I realized that really what I wanted and needed was to talk to other adoptees in person. And I found an organization called Adoptees Connect, and I was able to start the Providence chapter of Adoptees Connect. And I just hoped that at least one other adoptee would show up, because other than my sister, I didn't know, I wasn't in touch with any other adoptees. So I made a Facebook group and posted stuff, and I paid like $10 for Facebook ads and hoped it would reach people. And that was in October of 2019 was the first meeting, and since then every single month at least one person has shown up. So it clearly, I started it from a selfish perspective, like it was a resource I needed, and then clearly other people needed it also.
So you started early in the story, and I want to just reaffirm that we were also given that information. So my wife and I are adoptive moms of two children, both domestic adoptions, similar circumstances, and also very different. But the advice we were given when we were bringing our children home was use the word adoption as a regular word every day. And just like you would say, would you like a glass of water? Just have it be a part of the regular language. And we also were advised, and I can't remember the name of the book, but we did at some point, probably maybe when, maybe they were like 2 or 3, we had some books around the house, and we were told, just leave them around the house and let them discover them. And we did that as well. And so adoption and adoption language has been a part of us as well, and my children are 21 and 16. And I'm going to share just one thing that you're reminding me of a conversation with my son. I think he was 3, and we were upstairs in his room, and we were talking about babies. And he looked at me and he said, "Was I in your belly?"
Mm.
Oh, in that moment, oh gosh. And I had to kind of gather myself, and I said, "No, you were not in my belly. You were in another mommy's belly," and
Mm-hmm.
kind of have that conversation. But hearing your story kind of took me back to that.
Yeah.
So I also was clued in when you were talking about all the different identities, and you didn't have a lot of this language when you were trying to figure out and about this grief, right? And when you Googled that. So is that where the name of your organization comes from? Part of it, Adoptee Identity? I'm just curious because it fits.
It totally fits. Yeah. So Zoe, let me tell you, can I give you a little
Yeah.
history of adoptee identity? And I know people sometimes it gets confusing when I talk about Adoptees Connect and adoptee identity, but two awesome and separate things. So through Adoptees Connect and in Rhode Island fashion, Zoe and I, Zoe is the founder of Adoptee Identity. I'm the co-founder. As you mentioned, one of Zoe's childhood best friends happened to be a friend of mine, and she knew that I had started Adoptees Connect, and Zoe is also adopted. And so our mutual friend was having a conversation with Zoe one day, and Zoe mentioned something about checking out Adoptees Connect. And our mutual friend was like, "Oh, I know the woman who runs it. She's awesome. Like, check it out." And so Zoe and I messaged back and forth a little bit, and then I think I accidentally forgot to get back to her, and so we never met. And then like 2 or 3 years later, Zoe followed back up with me, and she reached out on the Adoptees Connect Instagram, and she was like, "Oh, I'd love to meet. Let's get coffee." So we finally did it, and I thought she was just coming to it's very typical that adoptees will come to me first and want to have like a one-on-one coffee or a phone call before actually coming to an Adoptees Connect meeting, and I'm always happy to do that. So I thought that's what we were doing. So we met at a cafe, and we did talk about Adoptees Connect, and then Zoe had a whole business proposal for me. Not for me, but a whole business proposal, and I heard it for me because it totally resonated. And I was like, "Would you like a partner in this?" And this was back in June of 2024, almost 2 years now. And we've been hitting the ground running ever since. And as Zoe was thinking about sort of the goal of Adoptee Identity, like you said, it just fit so beautifully to call it Adoptee Identity. All of the sort of I think part of it is like you can interpret that however you need to and want to, right? Identity means so many different things for so many different people, and it's such a like simple but also profound way of describing the experience.
Yeah. So I shared before we actually hit record, there are some stats that struck me that are on the front of your website. Can you just share how people can find out about your organization? I'm going to post it as well, but what is the website?
Yeah, so Adoptee Identity website is www.adoptee-identity.com. On the website, like Kathy just mentioned, you'll find all kinds of data, stats, sort of our why behind the company and why we exist and why we want to exist and know we need to exist. and then some resources. And so we're in relatively like early stage startup journey, and we're in the process of really building out our capacity, our reach, our market, all of that. And I think one of the most exciting things that you'll find on the website right now is a conversation card deck. I wish I had it with me right here so I could show you, but we have a conversation card deck, and one of the most sort of foundational components of our company and our vision really is fostering stronger connection and really helping adoptees, but also anybody with any biological unknown. And so when we think about adoptees, I think there's sort of the traditional legal process that comes with adoption, right? Like how I described, I was relinquished at birth and then went home with a foster mom and then to my parents, and then 8 months later legally adopted like at family court. There's also lots of instances where people are not legally adopted but might identify as an adoptee or really resonate with the adoptee experience. And we think about people who are donor conceived and maybe only have a connection with one of their biological parents and not the other. We think about people who are raised in single parent households. We think about people who are maybe like raised by an aunt or a grandparent. So there's kinship. Informal adoption happens pretty frequently. The list kind of goes on and on. And especially as we're thinking about all of the outcomes of ancestry testing and DNA testing,
Yes.
and folks having way more readily available access
Yes.
to data and information that otherwise might have been private or secret in some cases. There's not a lot of support for everyone navigating what this looks like and what it looks like to have questions, significant questions about parts of your history, your ancestry, your identity, all the things that contribute to who you are and help you sort of better understand yourself and where you feel a true sense of belonging and purpose and all of the things that we know sort of help us thrive in this world. So the conversation card deck is a resource that it's rooted in sort of a combination of lived experience and research. So Zoe and I, both as adoptees, have really pulled from all of the existing literature and research out there, coupled with our own lived experience, and created a conversation card deck that is inclusive of 4 themes. And the themes are adoption, origin, big feeling days, and embracing the and. So adoption and origin, really, it's like our stories, our roots, sort of the more maybe like process type things and how we kind of identify and define who we are, where we come from, who gets to tell that story, empowering adoptees to feel like it is their story to own and tell how they want and need to. Big feeling days is like Mother's Day or your birthday,
Yeah.
or going to the doctor and the doctor asking you, what is your family medical history?
Yeah.
Every single time you go, even when you tell them that you're adopted.
Yes.
Those moments. And again, they look different for every adoptee, but these are where some of the through lines we've recognized are really coming to the surface.
I'm gonna pause you for a second because I can totally identify with that whole piece and being there with my children when the doctors are talking. If there are doctors listening right now, is there anything that we can put out to the medical community for an awareness to have when you are talking to a child that is adopted, and questions that can I don't know if there's a way to lighten this, but I definitely am sensitive to kind of the ouch effect of that. But is there anything you can say to?
I mean, I think it is really as simple as asking if a patient is adopted before asking about family medical history, and then you can skip that question altogether. Or you can ask it in a way that is sensitive to the fact that they are adopted or might have a biological unknown. A lot of electronic health records actually have an option for providers to check in the EHR that a patient is adopted, and folks just aren't using it. Okay. So the capacity is there in many cases. It's just a matter of getting folks to actually check that box that yes, my patient is adopted, and I don't need to ask every single time I see them if they know their family medical history or if there are any changes in their family medical history. Final theme is embracing the and I started to get at that when I was telling my story around how I still, to this day, even after reuniting with my biological parents and families, I cannot picture any two other people than my mom and dad being my parents. And I feel like there were things that I missed out on, and experiences and relationships and connections that I grieve, knowing now that I have really concrete, like, okay, we weren't in California, but there were a lot of other things going on that I would have loved to have been a part of and known about, and kind of balancing those two things. And it's kind of like a making room for really contradictory things to exist simultaneously, and they really are separate, and one does not discount the other or vice versa, right? Like, just because I love my mom and dad doesn't mean I can't also love my biological parents. It doesn't mean I can't also grieve the loss of what we didn't get to have. And they're separate things, right? And it can be really tricky to compartmentalize that, and I don't know that compartmentalization is really the answer, but allowing space for all of it is the whole sort of foundation of the embracing the and theme. So with the card deck comes a booklet with a bunch of conversation prompts, and the whole goal is like really allowing folks to have language, right? So much of what I talked about is I didn't even know what to say. I didn't even know what to call what I was feeling. My parents didn't have language to use. The resources really weren't there. And something Zoe says so often is, you cannot heal if you don't have the language to talk about what you are feeling. Mm-hmm. And a conversation card deck, as sort of simplistic as it may seem, is, I think, such a powerful tool for allowing folks to start to build that connection and start to have language to talk about what they're feeling, and therefore strengthen the relationships with the people around them, because they'll begin to better understand themselves and what they're experiencing. And it's the deck is fun. It's a physical, tangible thing you hold, and you can like layer, like, oh, I have 4 big feeling days and an embracing the and all of these things are coming up for me right now, and this is what's happening, and this is why. And really walk through like the experience with tangible language. And
I love that.
Really
that's
helpful.
Great. That's brilliant. As you're talking to, something I've witnessed as I've paid attention to both my children, who have very different experiences, as we've talked about. Just like 5 biological children can grow up in the home and each have their own experience, right? So it's the same thing. But and this would be when my daughter, I think, 'cause she is definitely more verbal around this, when we're in a gathering and that adoption happens to come up, however it comes up, there's always this thing that I notice that other people want to say, and I know that there's good intentions, but I wish I could say, just stop there, but they always say, yeah, but you have 2 loving parents that love you a lot. Mm-hmm. And I realize, they mean well, but that's not what this is about, So I would just say, if anybody's listening, you can think that in your heart, but that it's not going to be received the same way when you say that to the adopted child, right? Was that correct?
Absolutely. And I think part of that in the embracing the and part of our framework really is like, it's okay. Part of life is being uncomfortable and experiencing hard things and going through hard things. It is a reality of the experience of an adoptee that loss and trauma are inherently connected to that experience. There's nothing anyone can do to make that untrue. What we want to do is help adoptees and others with biological unknowns be able to thrive despite that. Mm-hmm. And be able to sit with that and still be okay, right? I think you were going to get into some of the data. We know adoptees are at much higher risk for mental health and substance use challenges compared to non-adopted peers, and there's reason for that. Mm-hmm. And when we think about, I don't love this term, but I've heard the term toxic positivity before, mm-hmm. and I think it kind of goes with what you're saying, right? Like when we're talking about adoption and how everyone's instinct is to be, oh, that's so beautiful, you're so lucky, you have such loving parents, your parents are saints. I've heard that a bunch of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And it's not true, but there's a lot of other stuff that comes with it also, and those are all our reality. And so, as we have the conversation card deck that is in existence already. Anyone who is interested in purchasing it can on our website, which is really exciting. And we're also in the process of building a digital platform app for folks to be able to use two things. I think the first is a more sort of, I mean, we're all on our phones all day, every day, right? A little more timely digital version of a conversation card deck, plus a lot more content and awesome resources. So it's, a more sort of expanded version of that, but all again rooted in that framework and the combination of lived experience and research that we know to be so powerful. So allowing for this really, I'm obviously a little biased here, but incredible compilation of resources for adoptees and those with biological unknowns, but also being able to really scale that, right? We know as challenging as the digital and media world can be these days, it allows for really broad reach. And one of the biggest gaps, like I mentioned, is that we just don't have access to language. And there's a ton of really awesome boots on the ground organizations that support adoptees and their families and youth in foster care, but there's not a lot of scalable reach, right? We really need to find ways to share this message far and wide and share this resource and support far and wide. And I think the most powerful way to do that, and what we're hoping to do through this app, is doing that through a sense of community and belonging via this connection strengthening approach.
So when do you see this app coming out, being available?
Very soon. We should have our sort of first version available in June, and we have a wait list on our website that folks can sign up for if they're interested. And we're really excited to see that iterate and grow and get better and better in time.
Okay, you're on Instagram as well.
Yes, Adoptee Identity. It is.
I will put it on, but I just want folks to know they can find you on Instagram.
Yes,
Um,
Instagram. We have a website.
yep.
You can find me and Zoe on LinkedIn.
Okay. And what's Zoe's last name?
Hanson DeBello.
Hanson Develop. Okay, I'm going to have all this when this gets published. So as we start to wind down, I want to just have a couple practical things. If there is somebody that happens to have pressed play and is listening to this, and they are an adoptee, can you just speak to them? If they're this kid that's about to maybe go Google like you did, speak to them right now.
I think the most important thing to remember for any challenging situation, but especially here, is that you are absolutely not alone, and there are other people who are feeling what you are feeling. I think it can be one of the most isolating experiences when you're feeling something that is so different from what everyone around you is telling you you should be feeling, right? Like the comments that you're saying your kids have been, you've overheard your kids being told around, well, but you have such loving family, you have such loving friends. It can feel like you are so wrong for feeling anything other than gratitude and love. And you're not wrong at all. It is totally valid. There are 1 million reasons why it's valid, and everybody's experience looks different. And in addition to not being alone, there are resources out there. And we're really hoping through Adoptee Identity to expand those resources and make sure that folks know that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. It's completely valid. You are worthy of whatever it is that you want in this life, and you're capable of making that happen. And we're hopefully here to support with that.
And you have get-togethers. You try to have them every couple weeks, once a month.
Adoptees Connect happens once a month in the Providence area, and there's an Adoptees Connect Providence Instagram for anyone who's interested in that group.
Okay, great. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to say now for anybody that might be listening?
I think that maybe like a call to action, if that's okay. As we all continue to like find our place in this world, and there's, regardless of what you believe in right now, there is a lot happening in our country, in our world. And I think in times like this, it is really easy to feel discouraged and like, there's nothing we could do to make anything better, or it's all just out of our hands. And I think in sort of a grounding moment for myself, I guess, what I would ask others to do is really just take a step back and think about your own identity and everything that helped you become who you are today. And when you do that, think about how you can support others in their identity journeys as well. And I don't mean like necessarily directly doing that, but how can you help someone feel like maybe a little bit more of a stronger sense of belonging, or a little bit closer to who they are as a person, or connected to you as a person. And that's sort of my like philosophical call to action, I guess I would say. My very concrete call to action is that anytime you are talking about anything around identities or specialized populations, begin to talk about adoptees in those conversations. Adoptees need to be in those conversations. We have support groups and affinity spaces for so many identity markers. Adoptees are not on that list, and we need to make that happen.
You just reminded me, I've been an educator all my life. Most teachers have some sort of a get to know you questionnaire that's put out, and I don't know what your experience was around that with your education. Any advice for educators out there about putting that information in early to learn about who's in their classroom?
Yeah, I think similar to the advice that we sort of mustered up for doctors and medical professionals in the world, the first step is actually asking. Asking if someone has been in foster care or is adopted or has any biological unknowns. It is so powerful to even just see that question or be asked that question, and then what the resources and support looks like after that. Obviously, there's a lot for everyone to learn there, but step one is even just asking and being equipped with that information.
Biological unknown, is that a term now that you all are using and putting out there for folks to learn in terms of language?
Yeah.
I had not heard that, so that is good for me to hear. And I think, and I'm just going to speak that, people are afraid to offend people. I think that's probably where a lot of this comes from. But you're saying ask the question.
Ask it.
Yeah, okay. That's
Make it optional, right? Like, don't force information out of anybody, but ask the question.
Yeah. All right, Ellie. Well, I'm so appreciative that you came on today. I can't wait to put this out. And as an inspiration to my father, to remind folks that when you love someone, can you remind me? You pay attention.
You pay attention.
You got it, girl. All right.
Do you need to do that again, or you're good?
We don't need to. It's good. But sure, I'll give you a chance to say it. So, when you love someone,
you pay attention.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.